Right, good evening everybody. It's 6 o'clock, just gone, Councillor Potter. Welcome to the October edition already. Blimey, it didn't seem like 2 minutes since we was here last actually. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Froggatt perhaps? No? No. All right, yes.
I'm going to apologise because I'm going to leave in about 20-25 minutes time.
Okay, thank you. Late items by the chair, there's none. Any declarations of interest from anybody? No. Okay, item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of September even. Everyone happy with those? Move. Okay. Right, item 5. Items, application to be considered. Item 1 is Duffield Road. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. This is land at 398 Duffield Road in Darley Abbey. This is the proposal for the erection of 4 dwellings and the formation of an access road on the site aged red on the screen. It is the rear garden of 398 Duffield Road, and as you can see there, plots 1 to 4 laid out with the existing property 398 left in situ. There are 4 dwellings currently being built to the north of the site at 402 Duffield Road, and they're on the screen to the north above the red edge, and they're in the back garden of 402. To the east and south are residential properties that adjoin the application site. In detail, the Highway Authority raised no objections, subject to conditions. All the trees on site are protected by tree preservation order, and I think that's 73 in total. We did this because you'll note from the history of the site there was an earlier planning application which came to planning committee, was refused, quite rightly, because they proposed to get rid of all the trees on the site. And that was for 5 dwellings, and we felt that was clearly unacceptable, and it was a bit larger site than that. So we got a tree preservation order on all those trees. Our arboricultural officer has looked at the tree report that's been done, and he feels it's a well-produced arboricultural impact assessment. He's vetted it and vetted it in terms of the proposed tree removal. Although tree removal is always regrettable, some of it is acceptable in his eyes, in the quality of the trees and in planning terms. He's scrutinised that report, and in raising no objections has suggested condition 4 in your report regarding protection from construction. The Council's Land Drainage Officer has also reviewed the application, has no objections to the scheme subject to a drainage condition which is embodied in condition 5. You will also note that Derbyshire Wildlife Trust has no objections subject to conditions 3, which is a landscaping scheme, and we've imposed condition 8, which is a bat enhancement strategy. There was suggestion of bats in the vicinity, and with the loss of the trees from the site, the bat enhancement strategy will help to mitigate that loss. This, in my opinion, is a policy compliant proposal where the layout has been carefully crafted to take into account the constraints on the site. And Chair, you have speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Our first speaker tonight is Mr. Cash. Are you here, sir? Would you like to come down to the front? You have. Which is ever comfortable to you, sir? Fine from there. 3 minutes, sir.
Not a fan of microphones, but if everybody can hear me. My name's Andrew Cash. My wife and I live at number 5 Thatch Close. I wonder if your planning officer could put up that plan with the development on it. That's where we are, and if you look at the site plan, you'll see immediately that plot number 4 in the bottom corner is going to be right on our back garden. I make no apologies for the fact that we are, in fact, of the neighbouring properties, we are the only one which will be directly affected in my submission by this development. Our house and our back garden and our back windows will be directly overlooked. And if the driven inevitability of the conclusion of the committee is that the application is granted, I would ask that consideration be given to some amelioration of that plot to reduce its impact. We've lived quietly in the close for 10 years and enjoyed the privacy that the site provided. We were aware of the TPOs having been granted, and more will be said to you in a moment about the refusal of earlier applications. I suppose the point that I make, and I make it on behalf of other residents of Thatch Close who have also objected, and their objections are noted in your papers, is that we are troubled by the description of the site as a windfall, and we wonder where windfall stops. The developments on Broadway, the convent, St Benedict School, Park Farm, every bit of land that becomes available is considered a windfall and is taken up and built on. And this is but another piece, and we wonder where that ball will stop. It will have a direct impact on our life and enjoyment of the property. It is right, and I can share with you the fact that when the application at 402 was considered by this committee, the owner of the principal property at 398 lodged vehement objection on the basis that the development on 402 would affect his privacy and would affect his enjoyment and his amenity on the land. Of course, he now benefits from moving the plot on the other way. But his arguments remain valid. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to sell and move away. So I would invite the committee to say, for all the other reasons that are listed before you, that this is something that the committee should look very carefully at. The concerns about trees, about the environment, are not just for us, but for the whole area. It is right that windfall areas should be taken on, but of course windfall, some apples...
You've had your 3 minutes, sir.
3 minutes.
Sorry.
I won't tell you about rotten apples then.
As much as we wanted to,
No,
sorry.
thank you.
Our next speaker is Councillor Repton. Do you want to speak from there,
Thank you,
sir?
Chair. Mr Cash makes some very compelling arguments, and I think there are arguments that this committee, if it's interested in localism, ought to take into account when deciding this application. This is an urban oasis containing many species of bats and other protected species, and it's already been accepted by the head of planning that a number of trees will go. There is protection to a number of them, but a number will go. What will also happen in terms of my constituents, many of whom have complained, is that there'll be loss of amenity, overlooking, and they'll lose the privacy of enjoying the rights of their own property, which is a human right under the Human Rights Convention. Mr Cash talked about many oases and windfalls having occurred in this immediate area, and I've seen them one by one. And what we'll leave for our children is an area completely devoid of open space and the species of trees and mammals and bats and newts that actually inhabit them. And also we'll lose the ability for these to absorb the pollution from Duffield Road. So in addition to all these losses, both private for those living in the immediate area, the wider community, we have additional cars going onto the main Duffield Road A6, which will cause increasing levels of pollution and increasing levels of problems for people exiting and entering that actual road. So I would urge committee members to actually draw a line in the sand and just say, this is not acceptable. We need to protect certain urban open spaces in our city for future generations. And I would urge all members of this committee to reject this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Paul, have you got any points to raise there?
Thank you, Chair. In no order of preference, human rights, and Mr Teasdale will correct me if I'm wrong, human rights, I think the principles are accepted that in considering a planning application as we do and weighing it in the balance, it takes into account the human rights principles. So planning is compliant with the human rights legislation. In terms of trees, the previous refusal, albeit it was in 1999, the refusal at committee was only on the loss of mature group of trees and the impact of the contribution that they would have to the visual and environmental amenities of the area. That was it. It wasn't that this site isn't suitable for housing. It was only, or traffic or anything else, it was only on trees. And since then, we have preserved all those trees, protected all those trees. They've sought to work, the applicant has sought to work with us to retain as many of the trees of the, for those familiar with trees, they grade them in from A through to C and D, and we've got the A and B quality trees retained in this scheme. The tree report that came with it is a weighty document, and our arboricultural officer, who's, for those familiar with him, he wants to keep trees at all costs, is content with the application as submitted, that it retains those trees that we would like to see retained. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust are content with the application in terms of loss of wildlife and the mitigation that's being put forward. Windfall. Windfall, in planning terms, this is not an allocated site for housing. So it's a site that comes forward that's unallocated. Therefore, in planning terms, it's a windfall site. And from your member training that we did, you'll be aware that there is a presumption in favour of policy-compliant development. So if it meets our policies in our local plan, it's where's the harm? It's difficult for us to pin a policy on it to justify a refusal. In terms of privacy, and I'm going to have my back to you, I'm sorry. Can we go to the layout plan? There are no windows in that. That's the garage. There are no windows. There you go. The nearest windows are those two that I'm concerned about. There's nothing in the gable end there. So can we go back to the previous slide? So those windows, bedroom there, landing there. Distance from landing to boundary is 12.5 metres. Distance from bedroom to boundary is 12 metres. What we normally expect from a window to a boundary is 10 metres. That's the minimum distance that we accept. These are 12 and 12.5. So I can't refuse an application in terms of overlooking and loss of privacy because it exceeds the minimum requirement that we always look for. And as we've seen, the garage, that is single story. So that, the boundary is roughly here, doing that, that's single story, close to the boundary. Many members and I have had discussions about permitted development, what you can do without planning permission. You can put a garage down the bottom of that garden without planning permission. On the boundary. This is set in from the boundary. So, in total, we are happy with this proposal. It doesn't raise any substantive points of concern that we could defend at appeal if that's the way it was going to go, in terms of the highway officers happy, the tree officers happy, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and Drainage are happy. So it meets all our requirements, and it's a very similar layout to the one to the north. I think that covers it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Committee, over to you. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you for the comments about the overlooking on plot 12, and the diagram of the property is helpful. I was wondering whether we could restrict the opportunity to put windows in what is currently the garage, because it could be converted into a living room with a sort of, well, there as well, if you wish to. But I was thinking particularly, because of the height of the garage, there would be an opportunity to put in a sort of mezzanine type arrangement if people wished to. And I think that was where the overlooking could start, and we could condition, I believe, to say we can't have a window in that end. which might reduce risk of that occurring. The other point I was going to make is, although there's quite a lot of discussion about it being a curbed crossing, it does look in the plan here as if it could be a curbed crossing onto the road rather than a dropped crossing. And I just wanted to confirm that that was going to remain as a dropped crossing and not become effectively a little street on that from a highways perspective. Otherwise, I'm also a tree lover, but it's also a potential building site.
Anyone want to comment on the curb crossing? If you know that detail.
The intent is always that it would just be a simple footway crossing, not a formal junction-y type crossing.
Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Cashin mentioned the word inevitability, and unfortunately, yes, there isn't a great deal that we can do about applications such as this, because once a precedent has been set, it's very difficult to turn them down. I mean, I myself despise back garden developments, because I think those people that bought these houses, you know, had they known that they were going to be developments, they may not have bought them. It decreases their value, and, you know, to a certain degree invades their privacy. Now, I know Paul mentioned the 12.5 meters and you know, sort of what the legal requirement is, 12.5 and what the legal requirement is. But I'm wondering, you know, when these requirements were set, the houses were built side by side and there was plenty of, you know, room between them, or they were joined, and the back garden were private to them. Nowadays, because of developments like this, I think that sort of is not a safety factor for people living there already, or in Mr. Cash's case in Thatch Close, because yes, it's 12.5 meters away, but they can still look into their garden, which when Mr. Cash bought it, he considered to be very private. And I, you know, for one, feel for him that they're not in a position to move. So yes, we can't turn it down on you know, any safe planning grounds. But what we can do is to protect people like Mr. Cash and protect their privacy. They paid, you know, maybe hundreds of £1,000s to buy their house, which they thought at the time was ideal for them to live in. And it's been sort of, they see it as invasion of their privacy. And I think we should, not just for this application, but for future applications, make sure that the plot that's affecting an already built house has enough safeguards to prevent them overlooking, and, you know, or certainly invading the privacy of houses such as Mr. Cash's. Yes, we can't refuse it, but I think we can put conditions on there for Mr. Cash to have some privacy.
Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I take Councillor Khan's point. In fact, on plot 4, I would be unhappy about any new windows, apart from the bathroom windows, in that elevation overlooking this way. So I think we should be, on Councillor Kerr's suggestion, removing permitted development on the southern gable, but I actually think we should be going on this gable. So plot 4 should not be allowed to have any new windows without planning permission. Oh, yeah, I'd like to just tie them down completely. I think they've got them westerly and northerly as normal. There we go. Thank you, James. That is that. And you could see there's opportunity for windows, and if they converted the roof space, windows in there. Whereas preventing them doing it down that boundary and across that frontage. So protect that and protect that. But while we're at it, why don't we just do the whole lot and say plot 4 needs any new windows in terms of privacy for neighbouring properties? And that applies to the properties on plot 3, for instance. Thank you, Chair. Sorry.
Councillor West.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, in terms of privacy, so the trees to remain, sorry, the thing keeps jumping. Stop it, James. Is there anything that we can condition to put some screening in place to the side of the garage on the boundary wall? I know we can't have trees there, or it doesn't look like we could have trees there safely, but is there anything that could be conditioned there to give some privacy to Mr. and Mrs. Cash? It just looks like every other house on Thatch Close will have some sort of greenery, some privacy and some screening, and obviously the other side of those trees is the access road, so they're quite far away from any of the developments. But I do feel for Mr. and Mrs. Cash at number 5, because I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position. But yeah, I just wonder if there's anything that we can do, conditioning. Sorry, babbling.
In terms of condition 3, we've got a landscaping scheme that needs to be provided, and within that, and we'll probably talk about it on another item, boundary treatment. So we know, I mean, standard boundary treatment's a 2-metre high fence, but at least it provides that security where there may not be that security at the moment. And landscaping, in addition to what's shown there, because what's shown there is just the trees that are there, they're being retained. So they know, the applicants know, and we know that we're looking for a landscaping scheme to supplement that and to help bring that forward. In the developer's eyes, it makes sense, because the developer is going to want to sell this with a good landscaping scheme with a high spec, and those properties will have a good long-term outlook and good provision. Thank you, Chair. Stephen, over to you.
Sorry, Chair. Just very briefly, sort of, in terms of the landscaping scheme, I think just the reason perhaps needs expanding because it only deals with appearance of the development, so probably would need expanding to deal with protection of amenity as well.
Councillor Potter.
Thank you, Chair. Really, it's just an observation I'd like to make. I think I recall I voted against the planning for 402. Ever since that time that the building has started at 402, I've been inundated with complaints, and I don't know if Councillor Repton has as well, about the construction traffic which parks on that road, blocking the pavement, on the double yellow lines, and also blocking cycle paths. It now seems that we're going to have more blocking cycle paths, blocking pavements and the yellow lines for this development. And I just think it's something that we ought to bear in mind. Thank you very much.
Any further speakers? No? We shall move to the vote then. So all those in favour to... Hello. Yep.
And suggested changes.
Yeah.
On the
I was going to say to grant permission with conditions and those highlighted just prior to this vote. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Any against? Obviously not. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Councillor Khan.
Chair, nothing to do with the committee. I've just got just 15 minutes ago, a text from Councillor Nawaz. They've had a bereavement, and that's why he couldn't come, so apologies from him.
Right, item 2, site of 73 Field Rise, and Paul, it's over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Housekeeping, you've had circulated photographs and amended plans and email correspondence. Those amended plans were very similar to the revision D that's mentioned in your report. It's revision E now. So where you see revision D, we need to substitute that in the conditions in the report for revision E. And E showed us a 1 metre high fence towards the front of the property, and that revision is shown on the slide at the moment. It's there, the 1 metre high fence at that point. planning permission, this application is seeking to regularise a previous approval for a detached dwelling and has been in gestation for some time. You'll note from the history of the site, planning permission was granted for a dwelling here in 2010, and in 2014 that was amended. The position of that 2014 application is shown in blue on the slide, or edged blue, and that's the site layout position for it. The current as-built application is edged green, and for clarity, the edged red position, which is there, was the bungalow that was on the site originally. The dwelling is now occupied, and the bullet points on pages 15 and 16 indicate the changes between the applications. Subsequent to drafting the report, as I've said, we've had revision E, which alters the layout and elevation plans and gives details of that 1 metre boundary fence. Can we go to the other layout plan? There's, I think it might be the blue one. The one with the, that's one. This shows there's a metre high boundary fence along that side and a metre high boundary fence along this side. This is all hard surfaced. That is in the revision E proposals. This is a 2-storey dwelling, and it's between dwellings. You've got the street scene, James. As you can see, existing house, between house on the left, house on the right, in a suburban location. The construction work has taken some time to complete, and indeed the rear garden remains unfinished. We've got one of the rear garden, which was in the photographs I think you've seen, which you've had circulated. You will note that I have placed and agreed conditions for boundary treatment with the applicant's agent, and that is conditioned for 3 months from the date of any permission, which should actually prompt the builders into action. From the photographs you've seen, the rear garden isn't particularly attractive, and we'll probably hear about that later. And the boundary treatment they've agreed to put in within 3 months, and I suspect that will get the levelling, the patio and everything else finished, because they are actually living in the property at the moment. On its planning merits, this is a house in a row of houses. It is acceptable in planning terms. It's a reasonable form of development, and accordingly we're recommending approval for this application subject to those conditions on their suggested planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
We just have the one speaker on this, and that's Mr. Holzer. So you can speak from where you are. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Council has classified Field Rise as a residential area. Even though number 73 has been occupied for 12 months, no voluntary effort whatsoever has been made to improve the curtilage's condition and upkeep. The Planning Department has accepted that my amenity has been detrimentally impacted. But despite at least 2 prompts from me, they have never been proactive in changing this state of affairs. I am disappointed that you've not seen fit to show photographs of the curtilage to members, but I'm not sure what's happened there. 2 amenity measures, therefore, need to be implemented immediately, in my opinion. 1, a condition that there must be no trade or business use within number 73's curtilage. 2, a section 215 notice needs to be issued for clearance of the builder's yard contents and the rubbish tip. This should have a 1-month time frame. Condition 2 includes a fence completion date of 3 months. Very importantly, the PCC must also include very specific short deadlines for the completion of the permeable block paving, the patio construction and garden layout. There must be no ambiguity which would allow future non-compliance. In 2014, your land drainage team specifically stated that surface water should be prohibited from entering the foul sewer system. Because this current application is an amendment of an earlier approval, the former safeguarding condition must be repeated. Also, can Mr Clark confirm he will forward to neighbours the full PPS 25 SUDS details within 2 months, as per condition 3? I have already told Mr Woodhead that Aspect Consulting's 2014 report has not complied with this in 2019. Members will have read Councillor Skelton's criticism of persistent non-compliance. Conditions have been breached on every one of the previous applications approved by this committee. I have been on the front line arguing over this non-compliance with only a backseat reactive involvement from the planning department. After 12 years, on page 21, Mr Woodhead refers to the need to draw this development to a conclusion. Based on past non-compliance frustration, closure of this saga will never happen until the implementation of all conditions has been satisfactorily completed. Only the planning department has the powers to proactively monitor and enforce these conditions. I expect them to do so vigorously. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Paul, would you like to come back on any of those comments?
Thank you, Chair. Section 215 of the Planning Act deals with untidy land, deals with where it's detrimental to public amenity, and is dealt with as a separate issue from a planning application. So it's separate from this planning application. What we have here at the moment is a building site where a builder has taken his time, he's got his planning permission, and as you know, they have 3 years to start their work, started the work, and then builds at their own leisure, if you like. And there are many sites around Derby that start, stop, but they've got their planning permission, that's valid, that's live, and they can carry on at their own pace. What we have here is somebody who has frustrated the neighbours in terms of their build work, in terms of how they've arrived at and undertaken their work. The built form, the fabric of the building is finished, and we're left with the garden. I don't think they've surfaced the front garden yet.
No.
So there's still work to be done. I can't force a builder who's building something on site to complete the work. I could ask him to be more neighbourly. I can't force him to be more neighbourly. But the granting of planning permission sets a train in motion. And if there is untidy land, we can take action through the enforcement powers that we have. There's a lot of time. Last time I visited this site, it had the hoardings around the front. There's a lot of time why builders put hoardings around their sites to keep it out of the public community. In terms of trade or business, you can run a business from home up to a degree. Depends on facts of the matter. Depends on what you are running, how you're running it. If you have a hobby, if you have, I don't know, show me age now, Avon parties, that's running a business from home. That's acceptable. But running a business, a full-blown business where people coming and going, we've had cases where you are a builder, and builder's material is stored at your property and people come and collect it and take it away and you get deliveries. That's verging onto needs planning permission. So we would assess if trade or business is operated from the site, we have to assess it as in retrospect. We can't just ban them from running trade or business because primarily you are controlled through the planning processes because you eventually change the use of the property. The use of this is residential, and we'd have to investigate what other uses are being operated. In terms of the drainage condition, this is and would be a standalone permission, and which is why we have the drainage condition suggested in your report. In condition 3, concerned with surface water drainage. Now, a lot of that depends on what happens with the hard surfacing across the frontage, and the agent in the email that he sent to us has confirmed to us that they've laid out their drains and their surface water drains in accordance with the report that was Mr. Holt mentioned. Now, if that isn't the case, that's something for our land drainage team to assess and take any action, and or Severn Trent. It's not a planning function, but I can, and we have, or proposing to do, impose a condition where you demonstrate to us the adequacy of your surface water drainage. Shows it's going to work, shows it's not going to flood onto the neighbours. Because the last thing we want to happen is, because it's on a slight slope and you're slightly lower down, is water flowing off the hard surfacing across the frontage onto the neighbours, either side. I was asked if I could put right to neighbours with planning policy PPS 25, and I don't think I can do that. Anything that comes in on this application goes onto this our website for this application, and discharge of condition comes in as an application if the condition is to be discharged. So the details get proactively put out there. What we can't do is proactively monitor. As many of you will know, we have one enforcement officer, and the monitoring that we have on all building works that take place is through building control. Planning permission grants the principle of the use, residential, on this site, with a house looking like that. That's what we grant and expect them to build it in accordance with that. And any deviations that come forward, we get notified by vigilant neighbours or building control, because they're the people who are on site monitoring the build, monitoring the foundations, monitoring the drainage, and then we end up, it's retrospective every time. But we have to be, we can't proactively be on site when these things take so long to build. This chap's been building for a long time, and we have to, and unfortunately, we have to react to complaints we receive. I think that covers my notes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Any speakers? Councillor West?
Thanks, Chair. Just to reassure Mr Holt that we have seen the photos, they were circulated to the committee prior to the meeting. I do appreciate from those photos that neighbours are suffering from the lack of work to the garden. And to reassure you, I'd just like to say that I hope that the conditions that are set out here will be implemented swiftly and to your satisfaction. It does say that the last date for any of them is the drainage, which is within 4 months of the date of this permission. So that would be the 10th of February next year that all of this should be done by. And agree, it's a residential area, as Paul said. I just hope that the people living there do wish to be more neighbourly and get this matter concluded. So I just wanted to say, A, that we have had the photos, and B, to reassure you that 4 months should be the longest that things should take.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, but the debris that is on the curtilage has got absolutely nothing to do with the actual building that is built.
It is builder's yard contents.
This is scrap from other...
Right then, any more
Apologies,
speakers?
Chair.
Sorry,
Apologies, Chair.
no problem. Any more speakers? No? We shall move to the vote then. All those in favour to grant permission with conditions as printed. All those in favour? 7. Any against? That's
Can I just confirm that's with revision E, not D? Thank you.
Yep.
Can I just ask, have you put a timetable at all on the work I asked for? Or are you... I'm only saying this, that we want to get this completed, and you will only get it completed if you put a deadline on it.
What we can't do is make somebody complete.
Well, I understand that.
But what we're
but
trying
you
to...
say you want it completing. I want it completing. I've no doubt that the applicant wants it to be completing, but you will not complete it until you force him to do something.
He as we've said, the conditions ultimately are now spelt out in terms of do this within 2 months, do this within 4 months. 4 months is the last date. If 4 months comes past, we go past 4 months, he's in breach.
Last date for what? Sorry?
That's any necessary drainage details shall be implemented.
That's drainage, yes.
Yeah.
But what about I'm talking about the paving, the patio, clearing the back garden.
Only what is in the conditions can we tie them down to. So if the rear garden gets worse, then that's a separate issue, Section 215 for the Planning Act, for us to pursue outside of the planning process.
But are you intending to pursue that?
Well, we have evidence from you, but the argument's going to be, through you, Chair, that it's a building site. I'm still working.
Right, okay. We on to the final item. Potential future site visits. If I run through them and we get some nods of agreement or not. Beckett Well, I think we're all very well versed with that, yeah. Hackwood Farm, no, that's another one. Land at Ricknell Road, Littleover. No takers for that.